If you would, think of a person from the different spaces and places in which you just do life that is currently far from God. So just think of a person or maybe persons. It could be, honestly, it could just be someone in your own family that you're living with right now. It could be maybe a next door neighbor. Might be someone that you work with 40, 50, 60 hours a week. Might be someone that you're just starting to get to know at the gym that you hang out at, or maybe a cafe or restaurant or a place that you shop at. But think of a person in the place and spaces that you're doing life right now that just, right now, they're currently far from God. Now, with that person in mind, let me ask you this question. Why? Why are they currently, as best as you know, currently far from God? What is it that has kept this individual, this person, this friend of yours that you're thinking about, what's kept this person from God? You know, maybe this person at some point in their life was hurt by the church, or maybe hurt by people in the church, and now they just don't want to associate with church things, or they just don't want to associate with people who associate with God. Maybe the person that you're thinking of, maybe they're just an atheist, and they just don't believe that there is a God. Or maybe the person that you're thinking about is just indifferent. It's not that they don't care about God. They just don't think about God. They don't think about spiritual things because as they look at their life, they just have everything that they possibly need or want. So they're just not even thinking about spiritual things. Maybe the person that you're thinking about right now, or persons you're thinking about, they've just had a really hard go at life. And they've heard rumors that God is good and caring and loving, but that has not been their experience in life. They've just had a hard go, and there's just a lot of disappointment, or potentially they're just mad at God. And maybe the person that you might be thinking of is a person who's like, I've heard that God is all loving and all powerful, but man, when I look at the world around me, and I look at just the pain and the evil and the brokenness and the injustice, and seemingly God's not doing anything about that, I don't want to know a God like that. And honestly, maybe the person that you're thinking of right now, you would just simply say, Michael, I have no idea. I have no idea why they are where they are in relationship to God, but I do know that I would love to see them move closer to God. Again, I know that the people that we're thinking about right now have different stories of how they got to where they are, certainly different unique stories. But with that person in mind, and maybe as best as you understand how they got to where they are in relationship to being far from God, let me ask you this question. What do you think it would take for the person that you're thinking of to believe that they are known by God, loved by God, and in need of God? Like, what do you think it would take for that person to be convinced that they are known by God, loved by God, and in need of God? Some of you might say, Michael, I'd love to believe that that could happen. I just don't have a category that it ever will. And some might just say, Michael, that would be like a class A miracle for this person that I'm thinking about, the person that I'm living around, my next door neighbor, or my coworker, to ever make a decision to believe that they're known, loved, and in need of God. And others just might simply say, man, I have no idea. I have no idea what it would take for that person to believe that. Again, I realize that the person we're each thinking about right now, unique stories as to who they are and certainly how they got to where they are. But despite the uniqueness of each person's story that we're thinking about right now, there is one common denominator in how each of these men and women in which we're thinking about who are currently far from God would actually begin to take a step closer to God, and it's you. Like you and I, we are the common denominator in the person's life that would help them take a step closer. Maybe think about it like this. God uses people to reach people. Is that the only way that God reaches people? Well, no. But as I look through the scriptures, and as I certainly look through history, time and time again, we see God uses people to reach people. As I'm getting older, one of the things that I'm growing more and more and more convinced of is you and I, we live where we live. We work where we work, and we study where we study. We do life where we do life, all for one overarching reason. God cares deeply about the people where you live, where you work, where you study, and just where you do life. And he wants to use you to help communicate his care for those people through you. It's very easy to think, well, Michael, I live where I live because it's what I could afford. I live where I live because it was the only apartment that was available to me at the time. You might think, Michael, I work where I work because I've been pursuing this path and this job it's like my dream job. Or, Michael, it was the only job that I could actually find that was willing to hire me. And some might say, Michael, I do life where I do life because it's the most convenient and most comfortable place for me to actually just do life. All of those things might be true, but underneath that truth is this reality that God has been working behind the scenes of your life to strategically put you around the people he wants to reach through you. He's been working, whether you know it or not, strategically in your life, kind of behind the scenes, to put you in spaces and places where he'd use you to reach the people who are currently far from God. Maybe think about it like this. God grabs a hold of your heart so that he might use your heart to reach the hearts of those around you. Like God's done something in each of our hearts, and he does that not just for us and him. He does that so that in really beautiful, unique, and relational and powerful ways, God uses our hearts to help communicate his heart to those around us. Last Sunday, we began a new series entitled Follow Me. And I mentioned this last week, but it's worth mentioning again. The heart behind the series is really to accomplish one of two things, either a spot check or a clarity check. A spot check, specifically for those that are here and say, I identify as a follower of Jesus. Well, if that's you, what this series is intended to do, a spot check for you and I would be, am I following Jesus in the way that Jesus intended to be followed, or in some way have I started following him in a way that he never intended, maybe in a way that is something less? And it's also meant to be a clarity check that some of you here are still exploring and considering following Jesus, exploring just Christianity. And the heart for you is that this series would help articulate with just clarity what it means to follow Jesus as Jesus intends to be followed. Now, if you have a Bible, open with me to the Gospel of Luke. And as you turn there, let me remind you of something about followership. And followership, we become like the one we follow. For better or for worse, in time, we will become like the one or even the thing that we follow. And for those who choose to follow Jesus in the way that Jesus intends to be followed, in time, you will continue to become more and more and more like Jesus, meaning we will start to see the world like he sees the world. We will start to see people like he sees people. We will start to care about people, things, in the same way that Jesus does. And as we're about to see in Luke 5, his mission, his focus, his aim will be our mission, focus, and aim. This is in Luke chapter 5, starting at verse 27. Later, as Jesus left the town, he saw a tax collector named Levi sitting at his tax collector's booth. "Follow me and be my disciple," Jesus said to him. Now, before we look at how Levi responded to this invitation, by the way, Levi is also known as Matthew, the one who wrote the Gospel of Matthew. Before we look at how he responded, let me ask you this question. It says in verse 27 that when Jesus saw Levi, what did Jesus see when he saw Levi? Like, what was it about Levi that when Jesus saw him, he was compelled to ask Levi to follow him? Because when I see Levi, and when anyone and everyone else in the first century would have seen Levi, they would have seen two things. They would have seen a thief and a traitor. And the reason being, Jews living in the first century were living under the persecution and occupation of the Romans, which meant they were forced to pay taxes to Caesar. And instead of Romans collecting taxes from the Jewish people, they enlisted someone else to do their dirty work. They enlisted Jewish individuals to collect taxes for them. And so as you might imagine, Jewish men and women did not think too fondly of Jews who were at some level working for the very nation that was occupying them. Maybe think about it like this. In 72 days, when you pay your taxes, as a public service announcement that you have 72 days to work out your taxes, imagine if the IRS just out of nowhere decided to charge you 50% more and just called it a service charge. Imagine if you owed the government, say, $10,000. That's what you owed in taxes, but the IRS said, we're actually going to charge you $15,000, and you have to pay it, and if you don't pay it, you're going to be in all sorts of trouble. And all of us would be pretty frustrated because that's all sorts of wrong, and the government is not, they don't care. As long as they get their 10K, they don't care what the IRS gets on top of that. Well, however you would be feeling towards the IRS for upcharging and collecting more than that was due, then you can start to kind of imagine what people thought about tax collectors upcharging their own people to make a buck, and the Romans were not saying anything about it. So they were not only thieves, but they were also traitors because they were working for the very people that were occupying the Jewish people. All right, but more than just these individuals being seen as thieves and traitors, they honestly would have been viewed primarily through the lens of, that's an enemy of God. Because Jewish people in first century viewed Romans as the Romans were enemies of God because they're persecuting the people of God. And because of that, God views the Romans as an enemy. So anyone who aligns themselves with Rome is also an enemy of God. So when Jesus sees Levi, and he invites Levi to follow him, every single person in the crowd that day witnessing what's happening, they would have thought to themselves, did Jesus really just invite an enemy of God to follow him? So let me ask again, when Jesus saw Levi, what on earth did Jesus see that compelled him to invite Levi into a relationship with him? Because clearly Jesus didn't see him as an enemy of God. And clearly Jesus saw something in Levi that no one else saw when they saw Levi. What Jesus saw when he saw Levi is one who's known by God, loved by God, and in need of God. When Jesus looked at Levi, the tax collector, he saw one who's known by God, loved by God, and in need of God. So please catch that if you are going to be a follower of Jesus and follow Jesus in the way that Jesus intends to be followed, we will begin seeing the people and the spaces and places in which we do life through the same lens, seeing people as known by God, loved by God, and in need of God. So let me ask you the question, when you see people around you, when you see your neighbor, like when you see them walking down the street or in the hall of the complex where you live, when you see the men and women that you work with 40, 50, 60 hours a week, when you see people maybe at the gym that you work out or a cafe, when you see people, what do you honestly see? Do you see people that might just frustrate you or annoy you? Do you kind of look at people through the lens of a bunch of poor decisions that person's made in their life and that's how they got to where they are? Or if you're being totally honest, when you see the people around you where you do life, do you just not care? And it's not that you wish ill will on the people around you. It's just nothing really happens in your hearts towards the people around you when you see them. It's almost as if you just kind of see through them as if they don't exist. So please catch this. If you're going to follow Jesus as Jesus intends to be followed, then we will see people. The people that we are doing life with, living around, working with, studying with, shopping with, working out with. We will see them as known by God, loved by God, and in need of God. And when we begin to see people like that, well, then followership is in their future. Let's take a look at how Levi responded to Jesus' invitation in verse 28. So Levi got up, left everything, and followed him. He got up, he left everything, and he followed him. Levi could have clearly responded to Jesus' invitation in so many ways. Hey, Jesus, man, I feel honored that you want me to follow you, but I've clearly got some things going on in my life right now. So let me clean myself up, let me get myself straight, and then once I get my act together, then I'll go where you lead. He could have done that. Or he could have said, hey, Jesus, here's the deal. I make a pretty decent salary. And that salary that I'm bringing in might not be the most honest, but the salary I bring in, man, it has afforded me a standard of living that is really nice. So how about this? Rather than actually follow you, why don't I just support you in your ministry? And when you're in town, you and I will catch some time together. Like clearly, Levi could have had a myriad of responses to Jesus' invitation, but the way Levi did respond to Jesus' invitation actually says more about Jesus than it does Levi. I mean, it is amazing that Levi responded so quickly and so decisively to this invitation. To be completely honest, this is like one of those things when I read in Scripture, I'm like, I believe it, but I don't. You know what I mean? Have you ever had that before? You're like, it's here, and I believe it, but I just can't believe that his response was, I'm just going to walk away from everything and follow this Jewish rabbi. Now, it's easy to think, well, Michael, this guy hated his life. He was miserable. No one liked him. No one cared about him. Everyone thought of him as a traitor and a thief and an enemy of God. Well, even if that's true, and I'm not sure it's completely true that he hated his life, the fact that Levi followed so quickly and so decisively, again, says more about Jesus than it does Levi. And here's what I mean by that. We know what Jesus saw when he saw Levi, known by God, loved by God, and in need of God. But what did Levi see in Jesus? Like, what did Levi just see in this individual Jesus that he was able to respond to this invitation so quickly and so decisively? And I don't want to overcomplicate anything because I don't think it's that complicated. I think what he saw in Jesus was what we often miss, someone who was worth following. I think when Levi saw Jesus and he heard the invitation, he saw in Jesus someone who is worth following. Maybe what Levi saw in Jesus was someone who was worth dropping everything for at a moment's notice, because in Jesus, Levi saw that someone knew him, saw that someone loved him, and saw that this would be the one who could meet his greatest need to be with God. See, when Jesus invited Levi to come follow me, let me give you the translation of that. Jesus is saying to Levi, I want you to be with me. Levi, I want you to be with me. And just so we're all clear, when Jesus invites you and I to follow him, the message is, I want you to be with me. Now, I don't know for sure Levi's backstory, but I can say with some level of certainty and confidence that I don't think he had heard that message in a really long time. But that's what he heard when he heard Jesus say, come follow me. Levi, I want you to be with me. And as we're about to see in the rest of this story, when someone not only hears that invitation of I want you to be with me, and they respond like Levi did, well, then something happens in that you want those around you to get around Jesus as well. This is verse 29. Later, Levi held a banquet or a feast in his home with Jesus as the guest of honor. Many of Levi's fellow tax collectors and other guests also ate with him. One of the things that I love about Levi in this moment is it didn't even occur to him that Jesus would wouldn't want to be around his friends. Like, it wasn't even a thought for him that Jesus would want to be around his friends. And honestly, it wasn't even a thought for Levi that his friends would want to be around Jesus. He just made this assumption, if Jesus wants to be with me, then he is going to love my friends. And my friends, notorious sinners, are going to love being around him. If today I were to invite you into my home for dinner tonight, what would that communicate to you? Or vice versa, if you were to invite me into your home to share a meal, a lunch, or dinner with you tonight, what would that communicate to me? It would communicate friendship, right? It would communicate to me that you want me to be with you, that you want to begin a friendship or a relationship. The fact that you're inviting me into your home tells me you care enough about me, or at least interested in getting to know me, that you want to bring me into your home, and vice versa. In the first century, to invite somebody into your home for a meal or a feast like Levi did was to communicate the desire and the intention of friendship. I mean, I don't ask this in I don't ask this question in a judgmental way, but I ask it just as a heart check moment. When is the last time you invited someone into your home who doesn't know God? It's that friend that you're working with or living around, kind of doing life in proximity to. When's the last time you invited someone who doesn't know God into the spaces and places that you do life into your home to have a meal with you? When's the last time that happened? I mean, we might do this at the holiday time, but meal sharing in our homes has been replaced with sharing meals with people at restaurants. Again, I am not anti-eating a meal with people in restaurants. If you invite me to dinner at Capitol Grill, I will say yes every time. I just will. I'm that kind of guy. But here's a big difference of inviting somebody into your home. Because you're communicating to that individual, I want to get to know you. And I want us to have a relationship, a friendship. This past Thursday, we had the Woburn's men's varsity basketball team, 12 players, into our home for dinner. What do you think we did with that? Well, we spent good time making sure our house was as clean as it possibly could. Kyla spent the better part of 2 days cooking just what she was hoping that these student athletes would just enjoy having. Basically, we did everything we possibly could to communicate to these kids that were coming into our house, who were friends of my son. We care about you. Like, we want to have friendship with you. We want to get to know you guys. And we hopefully want to get to know your family, because this is what meal sharing does. It was true in the first century, and I think it's even true now. Meal sharing in your home communicates friendship. Thus, when Levi invites Jesus to this banquet, and Jesus says yes to coming to Levi's home, no one would have missed the message that Jesus desires friendship with Levi and his friends. Well, as you might imagine, the religious guys, they didn't really like Jesus hanging out with Levi and his tax-collecting sinful friends. This is in verse 30, their response. But the Pharisees and their teachers of religious law, they complained bitterly to Jesus' disciples. Why do you eat with and drink with such scum? Why do you eat with? Why do you drink with? Translation, why are you friends with scum, Jesus? Now, one would think that in this moment, Jesus would get all like righteously angry. Who are you to think of them as scum? You think that Jesus would correct them, rebuke them, kind of put them in their place, but what Jesus does next is to make crystal clear what his heart is and what his mission is. This is in verse 31 and verse 32. Jesus answered them, "Healthy people don't need a doctor, sick people do. I have come to call not those who think they are righteous, but those who know they are sinners and need to repent." It's almost as if Jesus looks at them and says, yeah, I know this is a pretty messed up group of people I'm hanging out with right now. But that's why I'm here. That's why I came. Jesus doesn't defend or affirm Levi and his friends' sinful decisions and choices, but rather what he communicates to Levi and his friends, and certainly the religious leaders in that moment, is his heart and his mission. His heart for Levi and his friends. I know them, I love them, and I know that they need God. And he communicates his mission is, that's why I'm here. I'm here specifically for them, so that they would know they're known by God, loved by God, and in need of God. If you're going to follow Jesus as Jesus intends to be followed, then your heart will be his. Your mission will be his mission, not some iteration or variation of it. Our hearts will beat for those who are far from God right now. Our hearts will beat for the people that are often just seen through and looked through and ignored. And our mission will be to do anything and everything through the lens of friendship, inviting them into the spaces and places in which we dwell so that they might experience friendship with God. I am really good at hanging out with others who love and follow Jesus. I'm really good at spending time in my home or in others' homes of other men and women who love Jesus. And I love that. Like, I'm so thankful for those relationships and friendships that I have where we can mutually challenge and encourage and just be together and have friendship. But this story all week has been really, really challenging me. And what's been challenging me is this: redemptive relationships. If Jesus desires friendship with the people who don't know God in the spaces and places in which I do life, then the question I've been wrestling with this week is, Michael, where am I making space for those redemptive relationships to take place? If Jesus came and was building redemptive relationships, where am I making space for those redemptive relationships to take place? We all have people in those spaces and places in which we do life that are currently far from God. And if you are going to follow Jesus, not in your way, but in the way that Jesus intended it to be followed, the men and women in those spaces and places, they are so close to knowing Jesus because you're there. They are so close. The people that you're thinking about, when I asked you 20 minutes ago, is there someone in your life that is currently far from God? You don't understand how close to God they are right now because God put you there. Maybe this week, invite a neighbor, invite a coworker, maybe invite someone that you've met recently at the gym where you work out, or a place where you just shop frequently. You're getting to know this individual. Invite them into your home to share a meal. And I know that's not like what we do in our post-COVID culture of inviting people into our homes. But if you're going to follow Jesus, then something has to happen in our hearts where we are pursuing redemptive relationships, pursuing friendships so that they might see that they are known by God, loved by God, and in need of God. Maybe like you've read this story a few times, if not maybe dozens of times. And this past week, this story's been really hard because I don't look at people like that. I kind of see through people. I don't pay attention like I should to my neighbors and the places that I kind of frequent. But I've been so challenged that if I'm going to follow Jesus as the way Jesus has told me and invited me to follow him, I will begin to see people who don't know God in the same way that Jesus saw Levi. And I will do anything and everything I can as Jesus did to show up in those places, into their homes, or invite them into my home. Please don't misunderstand. I am thankful for the relationships that I can have, that we can have with other men and women who follow Jesus. We need that. But if that's it, like if those are the only relationships, then we're missing it. Because there are too many Levi and his tax collecting friends that God has surrounded us with for the intention of building friendships with them. Jesus gave the metaphor in response to the religious leaders. Man, it's a hospital. Like I didn't come for those who think they're good, who think they're righteous. I came for those who know that they're sick. If you've been to a hospital recently or maybe a doctor's office, do you know why you go there? You go there simply to communicate, I have a problem, I need help, and I can't fix it. No one ever shows up to the hospital and like, hey, I'm here just to hang out. I've got everything under control. I don't need anything from anyone in here. The only reason someone goes there is because they finally admit, I have a problem. I need help. And I can't do this. That's where following Jesus begins. Following Jesus as Jesus intended to be followed begins with a man or a woman just saying, I have a problem, I need help, and I can't fix it myself. And Jesus says, I want you to be with me. I don't know if you heard that recently, but if you haven't, I just want you to hear, Jesus wants you to be with him. Not because you think you have your stuff together. Jesus wants you to be with him, to experience friendship, and then guess what? He strategically placed you in the city you currently live in, Woburn, Stoneham, Winchester, Arlington, Wilmington, Lowell, Burlington. He strategically placed you there because he cares deeply and profoundly about those men and women. And he says, I'm going to use you, my friend, to help build friendships with them. So Jesus, thank you that when you saw Levi, you saw a man who was known by God, loved by God, and in need of God. Jesus, thank you that you gave Levi an invitation that not only changed his life, but it changed the lives of the people around him. Jesus, thank you that for Levi, friendship with you changed friendship forever with everyone around him. Jesus, I pray that you would forgive me and forgive any one of us here, that when we see people, we're not seeing them, Jesus, as you see them. So God, please give us eyes to see what you see, to care how you care, to love how you love. And Jesus, in the same way that you entered into Levi's home, God, I pray that we would invite people into our homes, into friendship with us, so that they might begin to experience friendship with you. Jesus, whoever that person is that we were thinking about 25 minutes ago, thanks for bringing that person to our heart and mind. And I pray that we would even do something today just to make a connection, to invite them to be with us where we are. I pray that and ask for that, Jesus, in your name. Amen.